Welcome, everyone. Today's session is the first session to kick off this week's series, this webinar series, which is the Power of Language Learning webinar series. And each day this week, there's going to be different webinars being delivered from a range of different experts in their fields around well-being and mindfulness and DEI, and stress management, and I'll be back on Friday also speaking about how can we avoid the great resignation, or the great shuffle as it might be also known. But today I'm here to talk about filling the skills gap and what that actually means, and what sort of skills gap is there and how can we fill it. So welcome everyone. My name is Mike Hogan. I'm a trainer and coach. You may have picked up from my accent. I am from Ireland. I live and work in the UK at the moment, although I have lived and worked in many other different countries. I do online training and coaching for corporate organizations to help their leaders and their teams be more effective and more efficient when working internationally. I deliver online training. I also deliver face-to-face training globally. And I'd like to start off with a little story about something that happened a client of mine, something that happened someone I know. And this person was communicating with someone in the United States. We'll call the person in the United States person A, and person B was over in Germany. And person A was trying to organize a large event for all of North America to train the team there in a new process and a new policy that had been rolled out globally by the headquarters in Germany. Person B was a technical expert in this subject matter from the headquarters in Germany and was going to fly over to the US to deliver an internal training program and to kick off this new policy initiative, this new process, with a big meeting for everyone that was interested and was going to be affected by it. And there was a lot of email back and forth, a lot of planning back and forth, and they waited until about a month before the big kickoff was going to happen. And the person A sends person B an email to say, we've spread the word, we've told all the people that this is happening, we've had some interest, but other people are busy. But it's good that we have had some interest. So we've decided to forego the meeting. And person B thinks, okay, great. So everything is planned, everything is prepared. I've got all the new information from the headquarters and I'm ready to go and send it over to, or to communicate it to the North American team and to get everybody on board with this new initiative. But English is not my first language. This is person B speaking in their head in Germany. And they're thinking, I just want to double check, because that word in the middle of that sentence, I'm pretty sure I know what it means, because, you know, the expression in English to go for it means, yeah, let's do it. Let's go for it. But I'm just going to double check. So I'm going to have a look at the dictionary and I'm going to type into my German English dictionary, what does forego mean? And I see a bunch of different German words coming up. Aha, yes, vorangehen. That means to proceed. That means let's move forward with it. Oh, but wait a minute. That one down there at the very bottom of the list, auf etwas verzichten, means to refrain from something, to go without it, to not do it. Okay, let me dig a little bit deeper, was what the person I knew said. So they searched for the word vorangehen and tried to do a reverse dictionary search. And they found a bunch of English words like precede, progress, proceed. Okay, this all means to go forward. Brilliant. So they booked their flight. They flew over to the United States. They arrived on the morning of the big kickoff. They walked into the office of person A and they said, hey, are we ready? And person A goes, what are you doing here? And person B said, well, hold on a second. Yeah, it's the big lunch. And they said, no, we canceled that. We canceled that like a month ago. Do you not remember? I sent you that email. I said there weren't enough people. And so we weren't going to go ahead with the big kickoff. And, we still need to catch it up some other time. And so they tracked it all the way back. The miscommunication, the misunderstanding, the cost of the business class flights across the Atlantic, the cost of the hotel in North America for a few days. But the biggest cost here was the cost of that expert not being in their office for a week back in Germany. The lost opportunities for doing work in those environments, plus the preparation time that they had put into it. So there was a big challenge here, a big risk. And so what I want to find out from you is what went wrong? There was clearly a communication breakdown. So in the chat field, please, I'd like you to give me your ideas. What went wrong and why? Please write your ideas into the chat field for me. What went wrong in this situation and why? So Celia was the first to jump in. There was a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding because of two different viewpoints. So person A knew what they meant. Person B knew what they understood. Okay, so someone supposed this is what they mean rather than confirming. Or maybe the person who sent the message supposed they understand my message. There's no need for me to confirm. So my question for you, my next question then, is who was at fault in this situation and why? Was it the sender of the message because they used a word that might be difficult to understand because they did not check that their message had landed with the other person? Was it the receiver of the message because they made an assumption that they had understood? And maybe they tried to double check with the dictionary and then they drew their own conclusion. Both. Bad translation, wrong word choice. Well, exactly. That's the challenge. That's the difficulty with online translations or with any type of translation is there's multiple words and there's multiple contexts. And language is all about context and the context in which we use it. So I would say the responsibility of successful communication lies on both sides. So they both could have checked and clarified with each other that the message had been received or had landed correctly. But the point here, this is just a very simple example of how a simple misunderstanding and the lack of clarification can lead to big costs, wasted opportunities, and inefficiencies for organizations. One of the quotes that was on the video at the beginning, I'll come to that in a moment, but one of the reasons here for why this is happening, coming back to one of the comments that was in the chat field as well about someone had assumed that they had been understood, is what psychologists call the illusion of transparency. We often, all of us do, we tend to overestimate the degree to which our mental state, our thinking, is known to other people. We know what we mean, so we expect other people to know it too. And so this is a kind of a key starting point for when we, not only when we're working internationally, but when we're communicating with anyone, is that we can't expect people to be mind readers. But when communication misunderstandings, when miscommunication like this happens within organizations, it can lead to huge losses. So this was one of the quotes that was in the rolling video at the beginning of this session. This is based on some research where companies both in the US and in the UK were asked to identify lost opportunities and the cost of miscommunications or poor communications within their organizations. And it's absolutely staggering. And so firstly, what can we do to avoid situations like that happening when communicating with people across languages, across borders, across cultures, across distance, is to expect that misunderstandings will happen. Acknowledge that the illusion of transparency puts us at risk of not being understood, and to expect that to happen. Brilliant. We've got an example here. Always confirm the message coming from the chat field. And that's in both directions. Confirm the message has been received okay, and confirm what you think you've received, because you might have actually misinterpreted it. So always be aware of your assumptions. You cannot not assume. I'm not saying that you should clarify every assumption that you have, because otherwise life would be very inefficient and you'd almost be paralyzed by inactivity, by checking and clarifying everything, or by being afraid of every assumption that we make. But it's important to acknowledge that we do make assumptions, to be aware of what assumptions we are making, and then to make a conscious decision. Am I going to clarify these assumptions, and to which degree, or maybe not? But the important points, we need to clarify what those points are. We need to explain in more detail what we mean. If there's action to be taken, we need to repeat that action again and again and again. We can't assume that people have caught the message the first time round. We need to be aware of who we're communicating with as well. And we need to be observant of their reactions. Because everyone has a different approach, everyone has a different style. This is what we're going to dive into a little bit later in this webinar. So we need to be aware of who are we communicating with, how might they have a different style and approach to me, and what might their reactions mean, even if their reactions are less obvious or less visible to me. How am I adapting my language? And I don't just mean if people don't speak the same first language, but also what's known as the curse of expertise. If I'm an expert in a given subject and I'm speaking to someone about that subject, there is the risk that I might use quite technical, quite sophisticated language, abbreviations, or other things that other people can less easily understand. So we need to think about, how am I adapting my language? How am I rephrasing what I'm saying, or paraphrasing it, or summarizing it? And not only as the receiver of the messages, but also the sender of the messages. Am I listening carefully to the reactions of the other person? Am I listening carefully to what they're saying or what they're communicating to me? And am I asking questions back to be sure that I have communicated successfully with them in the way that I have intended, on one hand? And on the other hand, if I am the listener, am I listening for what's being said and also maybe what's not being said? How capable am I of reading between the lines in what I'm saying? And then we have to think about the different cultures involved and different possible interpretations. I saw a comment the other day on LinkedIn just about possible interpretations even through nonverbal communication. Body language, for example. A head nod might not mean I agree. Some people might interpret that as, oh, they agree with me, they're nodding their head. But a head nod could actually mean, I'm listening, please continue. A head nod might mean, I understand, but I don't agree. The same with a smile, for example. Does a smile mean, I'm on the same wavelength as you, I agree with you, we can proceed? Or does a smile perhaps mean, I feel a bit awkward and uncomfortable because I disagree with you, but I don't want to say it because I respect the hierarchy that exists between us, or I respect the relationship that exists between us. So I'm not going to voice my disagreement, I'm going to smile instead. And so here's the key, is what are the different behaviors and interpretations that are being driven by culture as well, which can lead to misunderstandings. And so this is what I want to dive into with you for the next maybe half an hour or so, is what exactly are the characteristics of working internationally? What are the challenges of working internationally? And what tools can we use on ourselves, but also with our teams, with our colleagues, with our business partners, with other people? How can we initiate discussions with them to try and overcome any risk of misunderstanding or miscommunication, and what role can language play to bridge this gap when people are communicating across languages as well. So firstly, thinking about working internationally, and what exactly do we mean by working internationally? Because some people might say, oh, I don't work internationally. I never fly. I don't go to conferences. I don't go to business meetings. I don't go to our headquarters in other countries or things like that. Now, often people think, well, this is what working internationally means. It means going somewhere else. Not necessarily. Not necessarily at all. Working internationally could mean having a face-to-face meeting with colleagues who are not from where you're from, for example. Working internationally could mean being part of a multinational or multicultural co-located team in the same environment, in the same city. Working internationally could mean I'm working on a project from where I am and I need to call people in other countries. Or perhaps I need to send messages, emails, or on Microsoft Teams or other platforms. I need to communicate with people in project team software that are in other countries, maybe working through other languages, maybe living in different time zones, and maybe with different approaches to doing what they're doing. So there's a lot of different ways that we can think about what it means to work internationally. It's not just about flying places. And so generally, when any of these situations exist, one or more, or maybe all of the people involved will be communicating in languages which are not their first language. Okay? And it's important to think about the difficulties that people may have in doing that. It's important to think about the confidence levels that people need to build and develop so that they can succeed when working internationally. Research has shown that when they lack confidence in language skills, they tend to avoid common situations like these emails and these presentations or these conference calls. I have known many people who have said, when I see a phone call coming in and the area code says another country where I know the person's going to be speaking to me in a language that I'm not very confident in, I run away. I leave the office. I wait for them to leave a message on voicemail, or I wait for them to send me an email, because then I've got time to decode it, for example. But this avoidance, exactly this avoidance, significantly impacts productivity because it slows things down. It slows down the communication in real time, but it also slows down the communication flow of what gets said and what gets understood and the detail into which we can go when communicating with others. And so this is then where what's known as business English was born, let's say, moving beyond general English terms and content and learning topics into thinking about helping prepare employees for the communication interactions that they'll need in the world of work. And traditional business English, this is going back 20, 25 years, looked at what is often termed as the big six of business English. By that, I'm talking about preparing people for meetings, presentations, negotiations, emailing, telephoning, and socializing. And many of the business English materials, course books, and courses and things like that addressed some or all of these topic areas. Now, you might see that you'll notice that some of these are functional communication areas, and others are events, for example, and they don't exist in isolation from each other. So, for example, in order to set up a meeting, you might need to email or telephone in advance. But these are what about skills, for example? The skill of agreeing with someone, the skill of politely disagreeing with someone could actually fit into all of these different six areas. And so they can't really exist on their own, and focusing purely on the language for meetings or the structure of a presentation or how to form language structures for negotiations, typically, if you give me this, I will do that for you, typical if sentences, conditional clauses, and things like that. The skills that are really needed when communicating internationally go beyond these. And so this is where we've seen a development in what is necessary to support employees with who need to work internationally, because the challenges of working internationally go beyond these 6 functional areas. And so when we think about challenges of working internationally, the big one, also in terms of size, is thinking about organizational complexity. Processes are different across different parts of the world, different regions, different countries. Ways of working internally within an organization. The legal framework is different. So what works for you in your context might not work for your team member or your colleague in their context in a different country. The way departments are structured, the IT systems that people are using, even within one organization, can be very different in different parts of the world. And so as soon as people are working internationally, even within the same organization, that brings with it very high levels of complexity. So thinking about the big picture, the organization, very complex. Then let's start honing it down a little bit. We've got cultural differences to deal with. And I'm not only talking about national cultural differences. These can often serve to reinforce stereotypes and prejudices, perhaps. And so rather than thinking about culture as something that defines nations, maybe let's branch beyond that and think about culture as ways of working, ways of doing things. Different divisions within one organization will have different cultures. Finance has different approaches to working and ways of working than sales might have, for example, or research and development. So we've got cultural complexity that goes beyond national cultural differences into organizational culture and just different approaches to doing things. Then we've got the challenges of communicating in another language, which is incredibly different. I massively take my proverbial hat off to anyone who needs to work regularly through a language which is not their first language. And so this is a key barrier, really almost the first barrier that people need to break through and develop and build confidence in. And then we've got trust. Relationships are built on trust, and successful business is built on the quality of the relationships that we have both internally and externally. And so we need to think about, well, how do we build trust with people in international environments? Because the way I build trust in my home environment, the things that might give me credibility or demonstrate reliability or bring us closer together in how much on a similar wavelength we feel with each other, they might not be things that you value when it comes to building trust and developing our relationship if we have a working relationship with each other. So the very things that I might be doing to help generate trust between us might be, in your eyes, things that are, let's say, blocking or restricting the development of trust between us. So these are all complex challenges that really kind of frame the context of working internationally. And so when it comes to training employees or program or course participants, if you're a trainer here in the room, we can help to kind of frame these different areas and challenges of working internationally, maybe by looking at 3 core areas and the interlinkage between the 3 of them: language, communication, and culture. And by language, I'm talking about, well, not only language acquisition, so acquiring the language, learning vocabulary, learning words, learning sentence structures, learning the phrases you need for a meeting or for a presentation or things like that. That's what we call language acquisition, and language usage as well. But I'm thinking about strategic language usage. So really thinking about, how do I interact with other people and what impact will my words have on them? So that really branches into communication skills. How do I build trust with people using the language that I have in a way which is going to develop our relationship rather than put it at risk? Or how do I overcome a difficult situation, something that has the risk of turning into a situation of conflict? How can I manage a potentially conflicted or a situation that might generate conflict in a way in which it protects our relationship rather than puts it at risk, while using my language in a language which is not my first language? So therein comes the challenges. And by communication, I'm talking about things like influencing others, mediating conflict, building relationships, engaging people, understanding people, listening and how we listen, and so on. And then by culture, I'm thinking about ways of working, different approaches to how we do the things that we do. So I'd like to dive into these two topic areas with you for a moment. And I'm going to show you a little way to think about this yourself, okay? If I am missing anything from the chat field, please do let me know. I'm going to try and keep a little eye on the chat field every now and again as well, but there'll be some time at the end to come back to anything I might have missed from it or any questions that you might have had for me. But thinking first about communication, let's think about you as a communicator. Let's think about your preferred style of communication. I bet you some of those approaches and styles, many of them, are the things that have made you successful as you are today and that have helped you on your journey throughout your life and throughout your career so far. But I bet you also that some of the elements of your style, your preferred style for communication, has actually held you back a little bit, has maybe got in your way in some way when interacting and communicating with others. Let's have a look at what I mean by this. Okay, there's a range of different ways that we can think about our own personal communication styles. Have a quick look down through this list. And for each one, try to think where you would put yourself on this line in relation to your own personal communication style. Do you have more of a distance style when communicating with others, or more of a close style with them? More structured in your communication patterns and approaches, or more flexible? Formal, informal? Proactive or reactive? And so on. Have a little think about that. And imagine where, if I asked you to put an X on the line here, imagine where you would put your X, or your little blue circle, as I have some here. It's interesting, some of the ones a little bit further down as well. Statement maker or question asker. Have a little think about an average day in your life or a week in your life. What's the percentage of statements that you make versus questions that you ask? When we're making statements, we lose the opportunity to learn about other people, about their perspectives, about their preferences, about their knowledge, about a whole range of things. When we speak, we learn nothing new. When we listen, we have the chance to learn something new. So have a little think about what that maybe means for working internationally and understanding other people. So this is a tool that you can actually use with the people that you work with. If you're working on an international project, or if you're in an organization where there are international teams, you can even sit down with a couple of people and say, hey, let's all just mark this and see where are we similar and where are we different, for example, in our own preferred styles. And you might find that the people that you have more similarities with, maybe you find it a little easier to get along with them. The people that you have more differences with, maybe they're a little bit more challenging to get along with. But herein lies the amazing advantage of working with diversity. And there's a talk later on this week about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all of the talks this week will be really, really interesting, but that one will most likely make the point as well that diversity is really, it's an amazing thing to have more of, because when we don't have it, we are at risk ourselves. It's very difficult to innovate. It's very difficult to move forward. And if we think too alike, then there is the risk that we make the same mistakes together. We dive into quick decisions together. We charge off down the wrong track together when we don't have a little bit of challenge in our style and in our ways of doing things. So yes, working with diversity creates a little bit more challenge to your own personal way of doing things and your own sense of identity and self, but it can make teams and organizations so much more effective when you can embrace that. So thinking about your communication style, think about someone that you work with at the moment that you think, there's a little bit of friction between us, or maybe our relationship could improve a little bit. Maybe on reflecting on your communication styles, you might actually be able to identify a source for the friction. Maybe it's because you're too alike in some ways, or maybe it's because other ways that you see things in different ways. You communicate in different ways. So this is what it means to work internationally. Building on communicating in a language which isn't your first, it's also thinking about your style of communication. And your style that has brought you success, maybe in your home environment, might be the style that undoes your success in an international environment. Okay, so building on from communication, I now want to have a quick look at the work of Erin Meyer, who wrote a book called The Culture Map, in which she looked at different approaches to working together. So when we think about culture, again, I don't want us to hone in on national cultures. I'd like to just think of culture as ways of working, different ways of doing things, different ways of working. And so in Meyer's book, she breaks down different ways of doing things into 8 different dimensions: communications, low context or high context. Now, what this means is it's around directness and how clear is my message from the words that I am using versus how indirect is my message from creating a need for you to interpret what it is that I am saying. Being direct can be very good because there's less room for misinterpretation, but it might hurt some people's feelings. For example, it might feel a bit sharp. Being indirect can be useful for protecting the relationship, but maybe it's a little difficult to find out exactly what someone means. So to which degree are we more or less direct with the packaging of our messages? Which links in a little bit with the second point around giving feedback. When you're giving feedback to another person, do you directly approach the negative with them because you see negative feedback as something helpful and negative feedback as a way of helping another person to improve and to become even better at what they're doing? Or do you see negative feedback as something which might damage and risk the relationship, and so maybe it's better not to give, or to give it in a very indirect or soft way, which might actually risk the message not landing, coming back to sender and receiver that we spoke about earlier on. Looking down through the rest of these different dimensions in terms of persuading other people, do we speak about the principles and maybe the background and the history and the reasons for a change that we are trying to convince people of? Or do we focus on the future and the benefits and the outcomes of doing this particular course of action rather than something else? Again, let's think about this. I'm sure you know people, you work with people who might give you the background information and the history to a topic before coming to the point of their idea. And you might be thinking, oh, come on, just get to the point, get to the point. Or equally, you might know people who say, hey, let's just dive straight into the point. This is what I think we should do. And these are all the great benefits. And you're thinking, hold on a second, hold on, back up a little bit. Tell me how we got here. Tell me why this is even a problem. Tell me what happens if we do nothing. Give me some background information first. So depending on where you might lie on this line, it will impact how you see other people. And maybe you have just recognized yourself in one of those two descriptions that I have given. So imagine now that we're completely opposite on these lines. Now we've got risk for misunderstanding. Now we've got risk of conflict between us. How are we going to overcome that? One way to do that is to talk about it, to actually maybe, again, sit down with your team member, sit down with the person from the other working culture than you. And again, I'm not only talking about national cultures, but let's say you work in sales and you need to collaborate with someone in research and development, and you need to get the finance team involved as well. You've got 3 different working cultures here, different approaches to working as well. Why don't we sit down and actually talk about where our values lie, where our preferences lie in terms of how we like to work with each other? Point number 5, decisions. How are decisions made? Are they made consensually by a whole group, or are they made top down by the leader of the team? If I am new to a team and I come from a perspective that I think decisions should be made consensually, but I'm in that new team and the culture that already exists there is a top-down decision-making culture, then in meetings, I am likely to voice my opinions about decisions. I'm likely to try and get involved in decisions, and that's likely to upset people. They might think I'm a troublemaker, while I'm actually trying to be engaged and involved. So again, herein lies a risk of communicating and working in different cultural environments with different norms and ways of working, is that if we don't know what we're getting into, our actual behavior about what we believe is good and right and best might be the thing that actually causes problems to our reputation, to our collaboration with other people, to our success, and ultimately to the success of the organization. So this is where we start to think all of this is so crucial for organizations and how they support their teams when working cross borders, across languages, across distance, is all of these different factors play a role. So I won't go through all of the rest of them, but if you'd like to dive into this a little bit more, or even to just think about these dimensions that I've got listed here, can be very useful to just initiate a discussion and a conversation with colleagues, even the colleagues that you feel incredibly aligned with, because you might identify areas where you're not. And it's always good to identify those and to talk about them kind of in 2 respects. One is, what risk does this diversity between us and our preferences and our styles present? How can this difference be a risk to our collaboration and our combined success on one hand? The other question, the more important one, is how can we use this difference between us and our preferences as an advantage for both of us? And that's the key here. That's a real key. I often work with another colleague of mine on various different projects, and he is incredibly fast thinking, incredibly fast moving, power ahead, go, go, go. And I may be a little bit more thinking about different concepts, different ideas. Wait a minute, haven't we thought about that thing? Oh, but we tried that one before and we did it this way, and so on. And so he protects me from being perhaps too slow to act sometimes by pulling me along, but I protect him from charging ahead in maybe not the best idea by putting the brakes on a little bit. And we've actually discussed this with each other. And what may have frustrated us at one point in our lives, we've actually now identified as a success factor for when we work together in a team, which is brilliant. And so this is why this stuff is so important. Both these dimensions and the previous communication styles and preferences, is that once you start to communicate with others on this level, you can become so much more effective, not only as an individual, but as a team and as an organization. So where does this leave us now then? Building on a bunch of these different ideas. Another book reference I'd like to give you is Successful International Communication by Chia Swan Chong. And she's tried to package a lot of the things that we've been speaking about so far together into 10 core skills for international communicators. And as you can see, it's a lot of these topics that I've mentioned already before around being self-aware of my own characteristics, my own preferences, and be able to reflect on how they add to my success, but also how they take away from my success. How curious and interested am I in other people? Truly curious and interested. How well do I listen? How many questions do I ask? Versus trying to push ahead with my agenda or my idea, maybe because I'm under time pressure, or I've got my own KPIs from a work point of view. My boss is telling me, you've got to get these things done by the end of the month. So I don't have time to be curious about other people. I'd say make the time, invest the time, because it will pay you back a lot more later. How aware of my surroundings am I? How perceptive am I? How open-minded am I to different approaches and different ways of doing things without judging other people based on my own perception and my own preference for doing things? One of the key things also, I'd say, speaking from personal experience, I've lived abroad for more than half of my life now. And one of the things that I have found is definitely necessary is a patience and tolerance for ambiguity. When you're working internationally, things will not make sense always. Things will be confusing. People's behavior will be confusing. Processes and approaches might look wrong, but they work in that context. So we need to have a very, very high level of tolerance for ambiguity, things that are not clear. We cannot bring clarity to everything, or we'll go crazy trying to do that. So me personally, I found this particular skill to be very useful over the years. We need to be emotionally strong because our way of doing things will be under attack. We need strong interpersonal skills, these relationship building skills, trust building skills, influencing skills, conflict mediation skills. All of these things we need to be able to manage in many cases through a language which is not our first language. We need core communication skills, coming back to these meetings and presentations and ability to negotiate and to communicate via email in a way in which it will not be misunderstood and someone won't fly across a continent and take a week out of the office because of a breakdown in those communication skills running through emails. We need to be highly flexible, highly adaptable as well, but we also need to have a strong sense of our own identity and objectives. We cannot be infinitely flexible in international environments because then we'll lose focus of our own goals and maybe even what we stand for. So it's really important to be grounded in all of this as well. But just to come back to this one here, I mentioned before about core communication skills, and embedded within that, I'm thinking about language skills. And this brings us kind of full loop back around to where I started today with the misunderstanding from that email. And so in any international working context, whether international means flying places or whether it means being at your desk and emailing and messaging people on Teams, we need to think of the journey that language learners can and need to take to be successful in international communication environments. And so we need to think beyond language acquisition. It's not just about learning vocabulary or learning grammatical sentence structures and things like that, or useful phrases, but it's really thinking about language usage. What do I say when I agree with someone or disagree with someone? How do I communicate a potentially difficult message to a customer or to a colleague? How do I tell them that the budget has been cut? How do I tell them that we can't deliver to them on time because we've got supply chain issues and things like that? So this is maybe what we call functional communication. But then, how do I communicate in a strategic way? So to come back to the last example, functionally, I can say, we've got problems with our supply chain, your order will not be delivered on time. Functionally, that's perfect. That's absolutely fine. I've communicated. But strategically, was that the right way to package a message to a high-level customer that's going to need to be managed in some way as to how I communicate that message? So you can see here how we're bridging from acquiring the language to using it in a functional context and then using it strategically. And now how do we develop that beyond language into intercultural competency, thinking about these core communication skills that I had before and our interpersonal skills? Because ultimately, we don't do business with other businesses. We don't work with other businesses. Customers are not other businesses when you're thinking B2B, but we work with people. People work with people. So all of the work that we do is an interface, an interaction in some way with another human. So how can we communicate successfully with other humans who do things in other ways? And so that kind of brings me towards the end of today's session. I want to leave you with another quote from an article and a piece of research that was done online, which then said, yeah, the most strategic enabler for international business today is language learning, because that unlocks the puzzle, let's say. That is the key piece in this puzzle to unlock the communication skills development, the cross-cultural awareness and cross-cultural skills development, and the interpersonal skills development that I've been speaking about. All of that gets unlocked with the ability to communicate in another language. So I think that's kind of brought me to where I wanted to get to with you today. I hope that you found it thought-provoking and interesting, and that you can use some of the tools that I have shown you in your work tomorrow with your teams. Have a conversation with a colleague over coffee tomorrow about one of those tools that I've shown you, one of the activities around communication skills or cross-cultural skills, or thinking about your own capabilities as an international communicator. This webinar today, and also the whole series this week, is brought to you by Mondly Work by Pearson, which is this really cool language learning app, which individuals can use, but businesses and organizations can use it as well. If you would like to know more about Mondly Works, you can book an intro meeting by clicking on that link there. On my slide, you can't click on a link, but one of my colleagues has just dropped that link into the chat field as well. So if this is something interesting for you, please do click on the link and check it out. Also, there will be a survey at the end of this session, because we'd love to hear what you thought about the session, how useful you found it, what you're able to take away from it. This will help us plan other sessions in the future. Finally, before I go back to the chat field, because I did spot one or two things in the chat field, I just want to say thank you from my side. I know the chat field has been flying up and down, and I've found it a little difficult to follow that and focus on saying what I wanted to say to you. So I will come back to the chat field in a moment. But if there is anything that I miss in the chat field, or if anyone has any other questions or comments, or they'd like to connect with me, please do so on LinkedIn. I'll respond to everyone, and I love to expand my network as well. But other than that, I will say thank you very much from my side. We've got a few minutes now for questions and answers. So I'm going to have a look back into the chat field to see if there are any questions, or if anyone has any now, please do pop them into the chat field and I shall let you know. So give me just a second. Right, so there's a few links in there. There's the book reference. There's a link to the form. So I don't see any questions. Yeah, ask me a question. Here we go. Question from Celia. Do you think that all of us could be good communicators just by training? I mean, I think that there are many different techniques that you can learn. So I think that everyone has the potential to be a good communicator, of course. I mean, it comes down to the question, well, what is a good communicator? And even the answer to that is going to be subjective. And there are, there's many different approaches and techniques that you can learn. And just like learning anything takes time, thinking about your approach to communication and how your current approach brings you success or maybe limits your success is a step in that journey of becoming a better communicator. So I suppose the question is, what does good mean? And when is the journey finished? I would say the journey is never finished. We can always, all of us, become more effective in our communication approaches, communication styles, communication outcomes, and we can all be good to different degrees. So maybe rather than thinking about what does good mean, a question for us all to think about individually could be, what does better mean? Because we're all on a journey and we're all good, but how can we become even better? What can we do to become even better? For example, I mentioned before the relationship between statements that you make and questions that you ask. I have personally found that I have engaged a lot better with people that I am trying to work with and collaborate with, and the business relationships that I have, and also the personal ones, by asking more questions and by trying to speak a little less. Because when you ask more questions, you get to learn about the other people more and their perspectives, their opinions, their restrictions, their worries, their concerns, their priorities. When you learn all of that more, then you can better adapt to all of those things. So that would be kind of my response to that, Celia, is rather than thinking about good, let's think about better, and we'll think about it on an individual level. Someone's asked, where can I watch this meeting recording? I believe, the next question, it's already there. It's going to be on the Pearson YouTube channel soon. Yeah, good means to successfully transmit our message. Yes, so absolutely. First and foremost, communication is successful when my intention has been transmitted to you and it has had the desired impact that I had hoped for. On one hand, then communication has been successful between us. I have said or done something, and you have reacted or done something in a way that I would have wanted to. So we often speak about the difference or the breakdown between intention and impact from the point of view of the sender of the message. From the point of view of the receiver of the message, we can think about expectation. What do I expect from you? What do I expect from this interaction? What do I expect from our communication or our collaboration? What are my expectations? And how do I actually experience you? Are you timely? Do you respond to emails on time? Do we have the same wavelength when it comes to quality of approaches or of dealing with deadlines or things like that? If there is alignment between my expectations and my experience of working with you, then we are more likely to succeed together, and the organization then will also succeed more. Versus if there is a mismatch between my expectations of us working together or communicating, a mismatch between my expectations and my actual experience of that. So these are also two key areas that you can think about when communicating with others and when collaborating with others, is the alignment or the mismatch between intention and impact and between expectation and experience. Lovely. So keeping an eye on the time as well. I realize you probably have places to go in about 1 minute. So again, from my side, I would say thank you very much for your participation, for your engagement today. It's been lovely to see you all. I have felt you all around the world, which is great. It's felt like a nice community in this session. Check out the rest of the program for the rest of the week. There are webinars every day this week from other experts in different areas, like I said, around well-being, stress management, DEI. And I'll be back on Friday at the same time, speaking about how to avoid the Great Resignation. And what I mean by that is about keeping people more engaged, more motivated, and more driven, not only to stay in their organizations, but to thrive within the organization for themselves as an individual, but also to help the organization as a whole, and what role language learning can play in that. Great. So I shall say goodbye to everyone from my side as well. And thank you very much.